March 30th, 1944. 0:20 hours. Somewhere in the darkness between Wetzlar and Fulda, Germany, Oberleutnant Martin Becker's gloved hands gripped the control column of his Messerschmitt Bf 110 G4 as his radar operator Karl Ludwig Johansen called out the closing distance through the intercom. 300 meters. 250. Target confirmed. Lancaster. Through the darkness, Becker could just make out the massive silhouette against moonlit clouds. A four-engine heavy bomber, wings spread wide, engines droning with that distinctive British rhythm. It was his third kill of the night. By 0:50, 30 minutes later, he would have 6. But something about these bombers bothered him. Something that gnawed at the edge of his tactical instincts. Each one absorbed punishment that should have sent it spiraling earthward in flames. Each one required multiple cannon strikes to actually destroy. And each time his 20mm shells found their mark, the Lancaster crews fought back with a ferocity that left his own aircraft peppered with holes and his nerves frayed. This wasn't supposed to happen. German night fighter doctrine had evolved specifically to kill heavy bombers with brutal efficiency, single passes, devastating firepower, quick kills. Get in, destroy the target, get out before defensive fire found you. The Lancaster was changing those calculations in ways that made Becker and his fellow night fighter aces increasingly uncomfortable. What the Germans were discovering, engagement by bloody engagement through the dark skies over the Reich, was that RAF Bomber Command had built something extraordinary. Not through advanced technology or secret weapons, but through ruthless engineering that prioritized one thing above all else: getting bombs to German cities regardless of cost, regardless of losses, regardless of what stood in the way. The Lancaster wouldn't just challenge German tactics. It would force them to completely rethink how they hunted heavy bombers in the night sky. The first Lancasters entered RAF service in March 1942, replacing the troubled Avro Lancaster bomber that had suffered chronic engine failures and earned a reputation as a widowmaker. German intelligence received reports of a new four-engine British heavy bomber, but initial assessments were dismissive, almost contemptuous. Luftwaffe. Technical analysts studying reconnaissance photographs and intercepted RAF communications filed reports that characterized the Lancaster as merely an enlarged Manchester. Same basic design, they concluded, just with more engines bolted on. The assumption was that it would inherit the Manchester's problems and prove equally disappointing. What they failed to grasp was that Avro's engineers had redesigned nearly everything except the outer wing sections. The Lancaster that emerged from British factories was fundamentally different from its troubled predecessor. Powered by 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines producing 5,120 horsepower combined. More importantly, it featured an unobstructed bomb bay measuring 33 feet long, capable of carrying payloads no other Allied bomber could match. But these facts remained abstract numbers on intelligence reports until German pilots actually encountered them in combat, until they felt what those specifications meant in the dark sky over Germany. Wilhelm Johnen, a Luftwaffe night fighter pilot with Nachtjagdgeschwader 1, described his first Lancaster engagement in his post-war memoir, Duel Under the Stars. The encounter occurred during a raid on Hamburg in July 1942. Johnen had successfully intercepted Wellingtons and Sterlings before, understanding their defensive patterns and exploiting their vulnerabilities with the confidence of experience. When his radar operator guided him toward a Lancaster formation, he approached with the assurance of a hunter who knew his prey intimately. The approach was textbook perfect. Johnen positioned his Bf 110 below and behind the Lancaster, exploiting what should have been the bomber's blind spot beneath the tail. At 150 meters, he pulled up slightly and opened fire with his nose-mounted 20mm cannons and 7.92mm machine guns. The tracers converged on the Lancaster's belly, right where the wing roots met the fuselage. Fuel tanks should have ruptured. Flames should have erupted. The bomber should have fallen from the sky. Instead, the Lancaster's rear gunner immediately returned fire with disciplined accuracy, forcing Johnen to break away hard as 303 caliber rounds stitched across his canopy, the sound of bullets striking metal, the spiderweb cracks appearing in his windscreen. When he repositioned for a second pass, burning precious fuel and taking unnecessary risks, the Lancaster was still flying, still maintaining perfect formation position, showing no signs of distress whatsoever. "I had struck it cleanly," Johnen wrote years later, the frustration still evident in his words. "I saw my cannon shells explode against the fuselage, watched the impacts tear into the aircraft. Yet it continued, as though I'd merely annoyed it, rather than delivered what should have been a fatal blow. The British crew simply maintained course and speed. I was forced to disengage due to fuel limitations, knowing that bomber would likely complete its mission and return safely home." This experience multiplied across dozens of night fighter units. During the summer and fall of 1942 began fundamentally changing German perceptions. The Lancaster wasn't just another heavy bomber added to the target list. It was something more durable, more dangerous, more difficult to kill. The technical reasons became clear through painstaking intelligence analysis of crashed Lancasters. German engineers, examining wreckage with forensic attention, discovered construction methods that explained the disturbing durability. The airframe used a geodetic lattice structure, reinforced with heavy stringers and formers that distributed stress loads efficiently. Self-sealing fuel tanks installed as standard equipment prevented the catastrophic fires that doomed other bombers after fuel system hits. Most significantly, the 4 Merlin engines provided redundancy that German twin-engine bombers completely lacked. A Lancaster could fly on 3 engines, fight on 3 engines, even maintain formation on 3 engines under certain conditions, lose one, and the mission continued. Oberst Viktor von Lossberg, commanding Nachtjagdgeschwader 3, circulated a tactical assessment in November 1942, based on accumulated combat reports from across the night fighter force. The document, captured after the war and now held in the Bundesarchive, outlined the challenge with uncomfortable precision. The Lancaster bomber presents significantly greater resistance to destruction than previous British types. Our pilots report requiring multiple attack passes to achieve confirmed kills. Standard tactics of single devastating strikes prove insufficient against this aircraft. The Lancaster's structural integrity and engine redundancy mean damage that would fell a Wellington or Sterling merely wounds a Lancaster, forcing extended engagement. The assessment continued with mathematics that made commanders deeply uncomfortable. A typical Bf-110 carried 360 rounds of 20 micro ammunition across its 4 cannons, enough for roughly 30 seconds of sustained fire. German pilots were trained to deliver 2-second bursts, meaning they theoretically carried ammunition for 15 individual attacks. Against Lancasters, pilots were now reporting 3, 4, sometimes 5 attack passes before achieving kills. The arithmetic was brutal and unforgiving. Each additional pass consumed precious fuel, exposed the fighter to defensive fire from not just the target but adjacent bombers in the stream, reduced the pilot's ability to engage other targets. Time spent destroying one stubborn Lancaster meant other Lancasters escaped unmolested to drop their bombs on German cities. The defensive armament forced constant tactical adaptations. Early Lancasters carried 8 303 caliber Browning machine guns and 3 turrets. 2 in the nose, 4 in the tail, 2 in a dorsal turret amidships. Later variants increased this to 10 guns. While individually less powerful than German 20mm cannons, the combined weight of fire from a Lancaster formation created zones where attacking fighters faced concentrated defensive barrages from multiple bombers simultaneously. Cross into that zone, and you flew through a storm of lead. Hauptmann Werner Straib, one of Germany's first night fighter aces with 66 confirmed victories, developed the Schräg Musik tactic specifically to counter this defensive fire. The technique involved mounting cannons at a 70-degree upward angle behind the cockpit, allowing the fighter to position directly beneath the bomber, match its speed perfectly, and fire upward into the fuselage without exposing itself to return fire. The concept worked brilliantly against most British bombers, turning night after night into turkey shoots. Against Lancasters, results were frustratingly mixed. The problem was that structural integrity the German engineers kept documenting. Schräge Musik targeted the bomber's center fuselage, aiming to sever control cables, rupture fuel tanks, or detonate bomb loads with upward-firing shells. But the Lancasters' robust geodetic construction meant cannon shells that would tear apart. A Halifax or Sterling often caused damage the Lancaster could absorb and continue flying. Multiple pilots reported watching their upward-firing cannons strike Lancasters, seeing flames erupt from the impacts, only to have the bomber continue flying as though nothing critical had happened. The construction distributed stresses so efficiently that localized damage didn't compromise overall structural integrity. Wound it, yes. Kill it, not always. Major Heinz-Wolfgang Schnaufer, who would become Germany's highest-scoring night fighter, ace with 121 confirmed victories, 58 of them Lancasters, described the type in post-war interviews with a respect that bordered on professional frustration. You could never assume a Lancaster was finished until you saw it actually falling, Schnaufer recalled. I remember putting 30 20mm rounds into one near Brunswick. The tail caught fire. Pieces flew off. Yet it maintained altitude for another 10 kilometers before finally going down. Their crews had discipline. Their aircraft had strength. The combination made them genuinely dangerous opponents. The night of March 30th, 1944, demonstrated both the Lancaster's vulnerability and its resilience in ways that defined the entire strategic bombing campaign over Germany. RAF Bomber Command dispatched 795 aircraft to attack Nuremberg, including 572 Lancasters. Weather conditions favored the defenders for once. Clear skies, bright moonlight, contrails that marked bomber positions from miles away, like arrows pointing to targets. German ground controllers vectored night fighters into the bomber stream with unprecedented accuracy, the radio discipline sharp, the coordination nearly perfect. Martin Becker, by then commanding True Nachtjagdgeschwader 6, intercepted the stream between Wetzlar and Fulda. His first contact came at 0:20. The Lancaster loomed in his gun sight, caught by moonlight, vulnerable. Becker opened fire from 200 meters, watching his cannons tear into the bomber's wing root. The port outer engine erupted in flames, oil streaming back, fire consuming the cowling. The Lancaster didn't fall. Instead, the crew feathered the burning engine with practiced efficiency and maintained formation position. Becker had to close again, burning fuel, taking risks, firing a second sustained burst that finally sent the bomber down in flames. Between 0:20 and 0:50, Becker destroyed 3 Halifaxes and 3 Lancasters. The Halifaxes required 1, maybe 2 passes before falling. The Lancasters demanded sustained attention, multiple approaches, careful ammunition management. His combat report filed the following morning noted the discrepancy with characteristic German precision. Halifax bombers typically fell after initial engagement. Lancaster types required extended combat and multiple attack passes. Ammunition consumption notably higher against Lancaster targets. What made that night remarkable wasn't just Becker's personal success, but the broader German achievement. Luftwaffe night fighters destroyed 95 bombers total, the highest single-night loss Bomber Command would suffer during the entire war. Of those 95, 71 were Lancasters. The Nuremberg raid should have validated German night fighter tactics. proven that concentrated defensive efforts could make strategic bombing unsustainable, forced the British to reconsider their entire campaign. Instead, it revealed exactly the opposite. Within 2 weeks, Lancaster squadrons were flying operational missions again, with loss rates back below 3%. The 71 Lancasters destroyed on March 30th represented barely 10% of Bomber Command's total Lancaster strength. British factories were producing approximately 270 Lancasters per month by spring 1944. Simple mathematics meant the entire night's losses could be replaced in just 8 days of continuous production. German night fighter units, meanwhile, had expended enormous resources, lost aircraft and experienced crews, exhausted pilots physically and mentally, for a tactical victory that achieved absolutely no strategic effect whatsoever. The mathematics haunted German commanders throughout 1944 and into the war's final year. General Major Josef Schmid, commanding I Jagdkorps responsible for Reich air defense, received monthly reports showing the growing disconnect between tactical success and strategic failure. Night fighters were destroying 40 to 50 bombers monthly. Impressive number representing genuine skill, but British production replaced those losses while simultaneously adding 150 to 200 additional Lancasters to operational squadrons. Every graph showed the same inexorable trend. German defensive capabilities declining, British offensive capabilities increasing, Lancaster numbers growing regardless of losses inflicted. The Battle of Hamburg in July 1943 had crystallized these realities with brutal clarity. RAF Bomber Command launched Operation Gomorrah, 4 massive night raids plus 2 daylight raids by American forces over 10 days of sustained bombardment. The raids employed a new countermeasure called Window, strips of aluminum foil dropped in massive quantities that completely overwhelmed German radar systems. Suddenly, night fighter tactics built around radar-guided interception became nearly useless. Pilots reverted to visual hunting, searching desperately for bombers by moonlight and engine exhaust, finding targets through skill and luck, rather than technology. On the night of July 27th to 28th, 787 bombers attacked Hamburg, including 353 Lancasters. German night fighters managed only 17 kills, despite desperate efforts and perfect weather conditions. The Lancaster formations pressed through with minimal losses, creating a firestorm that killed over 40,000 civilians and left the city in ruins. For German night fighter crews watching from the air, unable to intercept effectively, helpless to protect the people below, the psychological impact was devastating. All their training, all their experience, all their victories, rendered irrelevant by aluminum foil and disciplined British crews flying aircraft tough enough to absorb the hits that did connect. By autumn 1944, German night fighter forces faced resource exhaustion on every front. Fuel shortages limited training flights and operational sorties. Replacement aircraft arrived slowly as Allied bombing systematically disrupted production. Most critically, experienced pilots were dying faster than the training programs could possibly replace them. The average night fighter pilot in late 1944 had perhaps 20 operational missions before being killed, seriously wounded, or withdrawn from combat due to psychological fatigue. Veterans like Schnaufer, Becker, and Strybe became increasingly rare, irreplaceable assets thrown against impossible odds. The Lancaster, meanwhile, kept evolving and improving. The BI Special variant, modified to carry the 22,000-pound Grand Slam earthquake bomb, entered service in 1945. These weapons could destroy targets conventional bombing couldn't touch. U-boat pens with reinforced concrete roofs meters thick, railway viaducts deep in valleys, underground facilities. German engineers studying the raid results realized with growing horror that British ingenuity combined with Lancaster capability meant no target was truly safe anymore. Nowhere to hide. Martin Becker's final Lancaster victory came on March 16, 1945. His 58th and last confirmed kill. By then, the war was clearly obviously lost. Allied armies were crossing the Rhine. Soviet forces were advancing relentlessly toward Berlin. German fuel stocks were so depleted that many Luftwaffe units couldn't fly operational missions at all. Becker's achievement on the night of March 14th to 15th, when he destroyed 9 Lancasters in a single mission, set a night fighter record that would never be broken, but it was strategically meaningless. Those 9 Lancasters represented less than 1 day's British production. Replacements were already rolling off assembly lines before the burning wrecks hit German soil. The final. Statistics tell a story of German tactical skill crushed beneath Allied industrial capacity. Luftwaffe. Night fighters destroyed approximately 2,600 Lancasters during the war, an impressive number representing genuine skill, courage, and determination. But Britain built 7,377 Lancasters total. Even if every German kill claim was accurate and post-war analysis suggests overclaiming of 10 to 15% was common, they destroyed roughly 1/3 of Lancaster production, while Britain simply built more. The replacement rate exceeded the destruction rate throughout the war. The math never favored Germany. More tellingly, the Lancaster loss rate per sortie actually declined as the war progressed. In 1943, Lancasters lost approximately 4.1% of aircraft dispatched. By 1944, this fell to 2.2%. In the war's final months, it dropped below 1%. German defensive capabilities were collapsing faster than British offensive capabilities were degrading. The trend line pointed in only one direction. The Lancaster didn't just survive German night fighter opposition. It thrived despite that opposition, flying more sorties, dropping more bombs, achieving better accuracy with each passing month. Wilhelm Johnen, the pilot who first encountered Lancasters over Hamburg in 1942, flew his last combat mission in March 1945. His final score stood at 34 confirmed victories, earned over nearly 4 years of continuous night fighting. In post-war interviews, he spoke about the Lancaster with a mixture of professional respect and personal frustration that never quite faded. "We learned to fight them," Johnen said. "We developed tactics. We achieved kills. But there were always more. Always more Lancasters, always more bombs, always more raids. We were trying to empty an ocean with a bucket." That metaphor captured the essential reality better than any tactical analysis. German night fighters weren't ineffective. They weren't poorly trained or badly equipped. They simply faced an opponent whose industrial capacity made tactical victories strategically irrelevant. Every Lancaster they destroyed was replaced within days. Every pilot they killed was replaced within weeks. The British could sustain 4.4% loss rates, the Lancasters' overall wartime loss percentage, because their training pipeline and production capacity exceeded German attrition capabilities. They could afford losses Germany couldn't inflict fast enough. The Lancaster's true weapon wasn't its defensive armament or structural toughness, though both certainly mattered. Its weapon was sustainability. Britain could build them faster than Germany could destroy them, crew them faster than German night fighters could kill their crews, deploy them in numbers that overwhelmed any defense Germany could mount. The mathematics were unforgiving and absolute. 30 Lancasters produced versus 2,600 destroyed equals 4,777. That survived to continue the bombing campaign until Germany surrendered. For German civilians watching, Lancasters pass overhead, night after night, untouchable at altitude. The psychological impact matched the physical destruction. The Luftwaffe's inability to stop the bombers undermined faith in German defensive capability, revealed the lie of Nazi propaganda promising invincible protection, demonstrated that Germany was losing the war regardless of temporary battlefield successes. The Lancaster became a symbol of British determination and German inability to counter it. The sound of 4 Merlin engines in the darkness meant bombs were coming and nothing could stop them. In the end, the Germans weren't wrong about the Lancaster's vulnerabilities. It could be shot down. It did suffer losses. Its defensive armament had blind spots that skilled pilots could exploit. But they were completely wrong about what mattered strategically. The Lancaster didn't need to be invulnerable. It just needed to be sustainable. And that quality forged in British factories rather than engineering offices proved more valuable than any tactical advantage German night fighters possessed. The last Lancaster combat mission flew on, April 25, 1945. Not dropping bombs, but delivering food to starving Dutch civilians in Operation Manna. German night fighters, grounded by fuel shortages and the war's end, watched from abandoned airfields as their former adversaries passed overhead on mercy missions. The irony was complete and bitter. The aircraft they'd hunted for 3 years, the bomber that had frustrated their best efforts and survived their best pilots, was now saving lives instead of taking them. Martin Becker died in 2006, long after most of his fellow night fighter aces had passed. In his final years, he gave occasional interviews about his wartime experiences. When asked about the Lancaster, his assessment was characteristically direct and honest. "It was the most difficult opponent we faced," Becker said. "Not because it was impossible to destroy, but because there were so many, and they kept coming regardless of how many we killed." That wasn't tactics or technology. That was industrial power. And against such power, we had no answer. The Lancaster proved that sometimes in war, being good enough to keep fighting matters more than being perfect. It wasn't the fastest bomber, not the best defended, not the most technologically advanced, but it could absorb punishment, carry massive payloads, and most importantly, be produced in numbers that overwhelmed any defense. German night fighter pilots learned this lesson the hardest way possible, by fighting brilliantly, achieving impressive individual scores, and still losing because the other side simply had more. 79 years later, only 2 Lancasters remain airworthy. When they fly at air shows, the deep rumble of 4 Merlin engines still commands attention. German veterans who heard that sound in the darkness over the Reich never forgot it. It was the sound of an enemy they respected, feared, and ultimately couldn't stop. The sound of British bombers that kept coming night after night until Germany surrendered.